The clippings rattled in my trembling hands. Dates spanned decades, then centuries, each reporting eerily similar events. Twins born into the Montgomery family, followed by strange deaths, disappearances, or quiet whispers of madness. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I found my mother in the kitchen. She was seated at the old oak table, a cup of tea untouched before her. When she saw the canvas bag I carried, stuffed with journals, records, photographs, her face drained of color. She didn't ask what I had found. She already knew. "You've been in the attic," she said. Not a question. A statement. I spread the contents across the table, the evidence like ghosts spilling into the light. "Tell me," I said, my voice tight. "Tell me about the twins. What happened to Theodore and Theodora?" For a long moment, she just stared. Her hand hovered above a photograph, her finger trembling as it traced the outline of their faces. When she finally spoke, her voice was scarcely more than a whisper. "I was 5 when they were born. I remember being excited, 2 little siblings to play with. But there was something wrong. They didn't cry like babies. They didn't laugh. They only watched. Always watching." Her eyes flickered, as though she were reliving the scenes. Mother became obsessed. She said they weren't children. She said they were something else. Father thought she was ill, postpartum, maybe. He tried to help her, but she trailed off, her throat tightening. "But he died," I finished softly. She nodded, tears brimming. "They said it was an accident, that he fell down the stairs. But I was awake that night. I heard them laughing afterward. Theodore and Theodora, laughing in their cribs. A chill seeped into my bones. And after that, Mother took them away after Christmas. Told everyone they died of pneumonia, but it was a lie. She sent them to a private hospital overseas. I found her letters years later. By then, it was too late. They were already gone." She reached for one of the clippings, her hand shaking. "Do you see? It's always the twins. Every few generations, the same curse. Some say it began with Abigail Montgomery in the 1700s. A pact made in desperation, binding our bloodline to something." Her words faltered. I leaned closer. "Something what?" She met my gaze at last, her eyes rimmed red with fear. "Not human. Never human. They were the faces of children, but they're vessels, doors for something else to come through. And the curse is clear. Twins in our family are never just twins. They bring death. They demand it." The silence that followed was unbearable. "Finally," she whispered, "your grandmother couldn't kill them. She sent them away instead. But she never forgave herself." Her hand closed around mine, urgent and trembling. "Promise me, Eliza. Promise you won't stay in this house. The twins, their shadow lingers. Some things refuse to die." I promised her, but even as the words left my lips, I knew I wouldn't leave. When my grandmother died at 97, the house seemed to lose its heartbeat. For as long as I could remember, she had been its pulse, the matriarch, the keeper of traditions, the silent warden of its secrets. Without her, the mansion felt like a shell, its grandeur dimmed, its shadows heavier. The funeral was small, as most funerals of the very old are. She had outlived her friends, and the family was never large to begin with. Just my mother, my Aunt Catherine, a handful of distant cousins who looked at one another with polite detachment, as though even grief couldn't bridge the years between us. After the service, we gathered at the house. Walking up the creaking steps to the porch, I noticed how diminished it looked in the pale light of autumn. The shutters sagged, the paint flaked, and yet the air still held that same inexplicable weight, like a breath held for too long. Inside, memories clung to every surface. The faded portraits, the worn rugs, the grandfather clock that ticked with unflinching precision. I wandered from room to room, as if searching for her presence in the echoes of footsteps that weren't mine. And then, in the library, I found it, a portrait of my grandmother in her youth. She was beautiful, her eyes alight with some hope or ambition long extinguished by the time I knew her. My mother appeared beside me, her face pale and unreadable. In her hand was a thick envelope, sealed with red wax pressed by the family signet ring. She didn't meet my eyes when she handed it to me. "She left the house to you," she said softly. Her voice wavered, as though speaking the words carried a weight she didn't want to bear. The envelope was heavy. Inside, I found a brass key, ornate, cold, and old enough to feel like it had absorbed centuries of silence. Alongside it was a letter, written in my grandmother's precise, looping hand. It began tenderly, "My dearest Eliza," but the tenderness quickly gave way to confession. She wrote of secrets she could no longer carry, of burdens too heavy to take to her grave. The key, she explained, belonged to the locked room on the 3rd floor. The nursery, a room preserved, untouched, waiting for me. And then came the words that made my hands tremble. The twins were born in the summer of 1952. Your grandfather and I were overjoyed, but joy soon turned to despair. There was something wrong with them. Something I cannot bring myself to describe, even now. Forgive me, Eliza. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. I read the letter 3 times, each word burrowing deeper. The key burned cold in my palm. Behind me, my mother's voice cut through the silence. "What does it say?" I folded the letter quickly, forcing my face into a mask. "Nothing important," I lied. But the truth was already pressing at the edges of the house, waiting. The journal began with hope. My grandmother's words were filled with exhaustion but also love, the kind only a mother can pour onto paper. She described the birth as difficult, the kind of labor that left her fearing she might not survive, but her joy was unmistakable. Theodore and Theodora, my beautiful children. Perfect. Whole. A blessing after so many years. But within days, the tone shifted. Something is wrong. They cry constantly, but it doesn't sound like crying. It's screaming. The doctor insists it's colic, that it will pass. But their eyes follow me. Too knowing, too aware. I felt a chill as I read those lines. Babies aren't supposed to look at you like that. Not with comprehension. Not with judgment. By the 2nd week, the entries grew more frantic. They've stopped crying. They only watch. Awake when they should be asleep. Always watching. The words scratched across the page, sharper, more desperate. She wrote of the nurse who quit suddenly, unable to stand the way the infants stared at her. She wrote of sleepless nights, of walking past their cribs only to find them wide-eyed, whispering to one another in a tongue she didn't recognize. At 3 months, things became impossible to explain away. They sit up already. They speak words, real words. They murmur to each other when they think I'm not listening. Harold tells me I'm imagining it, but I know what I've heard. I turn the page, my breath catching at the next entry. The pets are gone. The cat. The rabbits in the garden. The chickens. I found Theodore with feathers clutched in his tiny hand, Theodora giggling beside him. I don't know what they've done, but I know it isn't natural. The handwriting grew jagged, desperate. September 3rd. I caught Theodora holding a pillow over Theodore's face. She is 3 months old. It is impossible. And yet, I saw it with my own eyes. I closed the book for a moment, pressing it to my chest. The room felt colder now, as though the walls themselves recoiled from what the pages contained. But something compelled me to keep reading. September 15th. The doctors in Boston found nothing. Perfectly healthy, they said. Extraordinary, but not alarming. Harold was relieved. But I've seen the way animals die in their presence. I've seen shadows move across the walls when they laugh. There is something inside them. Something not human. The entries grew darker still, singing voices in empty rooms, toys rearranging themselves at night, the children standing in their cribs holding hands, whispering, "Grandmother is coming. She wants to play." And then the most chilling entry of all. December 24th, Harold is dead. They killed him. The police call it an accident. But I heard their laughter after he fell down the stairs. I can't leave them. They're my children. God forgive me for what I am about to do. The final line was dated Christmas Day. Just 6 words, written with trembling finality. It's done. May God have mercy. That night, when the house had emptied of mourners and the silence returned, I found myself standing at the foot of the grand staircase. The key weighed heavy in my pocket. For hours, I had tried to ignore it, tried to busy myself with boxes and condolences, but the pull was irresistible. Some part of me knew this moment had been waiting since before I was born. The 3rd floor was darker than I remembered. The windows were small, set high beneath the roofline, and the only light came from the pale glow of the moon filtering through dusty glass. As I walked, the floorboards groaned under my weight, carrying the sound like whispers down the corridor. The door was exactly as I remembered, solid oak, its brass knob dulled with age. I stood there, staring at it, my grandmother's words echoing in my head. Some doors are meant to stay closed, but curiosity is a cruel master. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock. It turned too easily, as though the mechanism had been tended all these years, quietly waiting. With the faintest click, the door opened on silent hinges. Inside, the air was still, thick with dust yet carrying a faint trace of lavender. For a moment, I thought I had stepped into a photograph frozen decades in the past. The nursery was perfectly preserved. 2 small cribs stood side by side against the far wall, their white paint yellowed with age. A rocking chair lingered in the corner, a knitted blanket draped over its arm as if someone had only just risen. Toys, wooden blocks, cloth dolls, tin soldiers, were neatly arranged on shelves, untouched by time. It was as though the room had been waiting for its occupants to return. I stepped inside cautiously, half expecting to hear the laughter I had once imagined through the door. Instead, there was only silence. On a dresser between the cribs sat a silver-framed photograph. My grandmother, young and smiling, held 2 infants swaddled in identical blankets. But even in the faded image, her smile looked strained, her eyes shadowed with something unspoken. I set the photo down, my gaze drawn to the cribs. Each one held a small handmade quilt. Names stitched carefully across the fabric: Theodore and Theodora, the twins. My fingers brushed over the embroidery, and for the first time, I felt the weight of them. Not just names, but lives tied to mine by blood and silence. Then I noticed the journal. It rested on the nightstand beside the rocking chair, its leather cover cracked and fragile. I picked it up carefully, and as I opened to the first page, the handwriting leapt at me. My grandmother's, but shakier, urgent. June 15th, 1952. Today I gave birth to twins, Theodore and Theodora, my beautiful children. The ink trembled beneath my touch. The pages whispered as I turned them, and with each line I read, I realized this nursery wasn't a memorial. It was a warning. The moment Catherine said the words, I felt it, the truth, vibrating through me like the groan of the old house itself. The binding was failing, and if we didn't act, the thing inside that room would not stay contained. We can perform the ritual again, Catherine said, pulling a cracked leather grimoire from her satchel. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded in places, but still legible. Elizabeth managed it once. But it will take more than chalk and candles to hold them now. What does it take? I asked. She hesitated, then spoke. Blood of the bloodline. Your grandmother used her own. I can use mine, but I'll need you, Eliza. It requires 2. The dread in her voice didn't stop me. Then we'll do it, I said. That evening we prepared. Catherine mixed herbs, grinding them into powders that smelled of iron and bitter smoke. I placed black candles at the 5 points of a star, each aligned with stones of salt and iron. The house resisted us. Doors that had never stuck before refused to open. The air grew thick, charged, as though it knew what we planned. By the time the clock neared midnight, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. We carried our supplies to the attic. The moment we opened the door to the binding room, the rocking chairs creaked into motion, slowly at first, then faster, as though stirred by some invisible hand. The symbols carved into the floor seemed to shimmer faintly, their power waning like dying embers. Work quickly, Catherine urged. I knelt and began to redraw the circle with chalk made from bone ash. Every line resisted me, as if the wood itself fought against my hand. Catherine's voice rose behind me, chanting words that twisted unnaturally in the air. The temperature plummeted. Frost laced across the beams. My breath fogged in front of me. Then came the voices. Childish, but not innocent. Whispering, laughing. And then, clear and sharp. You cannot bind us forever. The rocking chairs slammed against the floor as if thrown by unseen hands. The entire attic shook. My flashlight flickered out, leaving only the eerie glow of the chalk symbols. Don't stop, Catherine cried. I placed the final candle, and the circle blazed with cold light. Catherine drew a silver knife across her palm, her blood dripping onto the center of the star. The room vibrated with the force of her words. With blood of the line, I bind thee. By salt and ash, I contain thee. The whispers rose to shrieks, angry and desperate. Shadows pressed against the edges of the circle, straining to break through. The floorboards groaned. The air split with the sound of laughter. High, cruel, endless. Then Catherine faltered. She turned the grimoire's last page and gasped. It's gone, she whispered. The final words. They've been erased. The voices hissed from every corner of the room, triumphant. Did you think we were helpless? And from beyond the doorway came the sound of footsteps. Small. Steady. Drawing closer. I sat in the nursery long after I'd closed the journal, staring at the pale quilts and empty cribs. The silence pressed on me, dense as fog. What had she done? The question throbbed at the back of my mind. If the twins had died, why weren't they buried in the family plot beside my grandfather? And if they hadn't, where had they gone? My gaze drifted upward. The ceiling above the nursery creaked softly, as though someone, or something, moved in the attic. I remembered another forbidden space from my childhood, the narrow staircase hidden behind a panel in the hallway closet. My grandmother had always said it was just storage. But even then, I'd felt its secrecy humming like a wire behind the walls. Some memories never fade. My fingers found the latch easily, and with a soft click, the panel swung open. Dust cascaded down as I pulled the narrow door wider. A steep staircase stretched up into darkness, its boards groaning in protest at my weight. The attic was enormous, running the length of the house beneath the sharply pitched roof. The beam of my flashlight cut through decades of cobwebs and dust motes. Trunks and boxes were stacked in neat rows, each carefully labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. Christmas decorations 1960s, Harold's clothes, family photographs pre-1950. I moved deeper, scanning the labels until one caught my eye. A small, unassuming trunk marked simply, TNT 1952. My hands shook as I fitted the brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying snap. Inside, the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic rose up, making me dizzy. On top lay more journals, their spines cracked with age. Beneath them, a stack of manila folders. I knelt on the dusty boards and began to read. Medical records. Admission forms from a private sanitarium in Switzerland. 2 children, Theodore and Theodora Montgomery. January 3, 1953. Diagnosis: severe psychopathy with homicidal tendencies. Treatment notes spanning years, all ineffective. The final entry dated December 1960. Patients deceased following unsuccessful experimental treatment. I set the folders aside, my hands numb. Underneath was a bundle of photographs tied with twine. I untied them, one by one revealing the twins at different ages, infants, toddlers, and finally children of 8 or 9. In the earliest pictures, they looked ordinary, even cherubic. But in the later ones, there was something in their eyes. Not sadness, not malice exactly, just emptiness. As if you were staring into a deep well and seeing no reflection at all. The last photo made my skin prickle. The twins stood side by side in hospital gowns, their small hands clasped. On the back, my grandmother's precise script, "May they find peace." But at the very bottom of the trunk, something else waited, A small leather-bound volume, its cover worn smooth. It wasn't a journal. It was a collection of newspaper clippings spanning more than a century. And every one of them told the same story. Twins. Always twins. Always tragedy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt alive, breathing in the dark, its timbers groaning as if they carried a burden too heavy to bear. I kept thinking of my mother's words, of her trembling hands and her warning to leave. But my curiosity, my curse, was stronger than fear. So I climbed back into the attic. The narrow staircase creaked beneath my weight, the flashlight beam carving tunnels through dust and cobwebs. I passed the labeled trunks until my eyes caught something I had overlooked before, a door. Small. Barely 4 feet tall, set low into the sloped ceiling. Unlike the rest of the attic's ancient wood, this door looked newer, its grain less weathered, its hinges faintly gleaming. There was no lock, only a simple latch. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I lifted the latch, and the door swung open without a sound. The air that spilled out was colder, unnaturally so, biting against my skin as though it had been sealed for centuries. The flashlight revealed a cramped chamber, its ceiling angled sharply. In the center sat 2 child-sized rocking chairs, facing each other. White paint flaked from their frames, and faded pink cushions sagged with age. They rocked gently, though there was no breeze. Then I saw the markings. Symbols etched into the floor, the walls, even the ceiling, lines and curves that seemed to shimmer uneasily, shifting in the light. They weren't any language I recognized, but they pulled at something deep in me, some instinct that whispered these were words human mouths were not meant to speak. I stepped closer, unable to look away. The patterns bent in impossible ways, angles that hurt the eye to follow, spirals that seemed to coil inward endlessly. And then, the door slammed shut behind me. The sound cracked like a gunshot. My flashlight wavered, my breath caught in my throat. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Something held it shut. Something unseen. The rocking chairs creaked faster, their motion urgent, angry. Whispers skittered around the chamber, too faint to understand but too deliberate to be imagination. Panic surged through me. I threw my shoulder against the door once, twice. On the 3rd time, nothing. On the 4th, it gave way suddenly, flinging me out into the attic. I stumbled across the boards, my chest heaving, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. Behind me, the little door stood still, closed once more. I didn't need the journal to tell me what this was. The symbols, the rocking chairs, the unnatural cold. It wasn't just a hidden room. It was a prison, a binding. And my grandmother hadn't just locked away her children. She had locked away whatever had been inside them. The discovery gnawed at me. My grandmother hadn't merely hidden a tragedy. She had built a cage. A prison for something that wasn't supposed to exist. And if the symbols in that chamber were what I suspected, the prison was weakening. I needed answers. Answers my mother couldn't give me, or wouldn't. That left only one person. My Aunt Catherine. She was the family's black sheep. Where my grandmother had been rigid, Catherine had always been wild, living in a cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by gardens thick with herbs and weeds no one else could name. Neighbors whispered words like witch when they thought she couldn't hear. As a child, I remembered her differently. Warm, curious, always asking me questions my grandmother never bothered with. She saw me, truly saw me, and that had made me love her even then. So, I drove out to her cottage. She was kneeling in the garden when I arrived, her gray braid hanging over her shoulder, her hands sunk into dark earth. She looked up as though she had been expecting me all along. "You've been in the binding room," she said simply. I froze. "How could you know that?" "Because it's failing," she answered, standing with a grace that belied her years. "The whole house is humming with it. You feel it, don't you? The way the air shifts. The way the silence listens." Inside, her cottage was cluttered but comforting. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, jars of powders and tinctures lined the shelves, and books lay stacked in precarious towers. It smelled of wood smoke, sage, and something faintly metallic. I set the journals, clippings, and photographs on her table. "Tell me the truth," I said. "All of it." She studied the items quietly, then sighed. The twins were never just children. They were vessels. Every third generation, twins are born into our family, and they carry something with them. An essence. An entity. Call it what you like, but it isn't human. Her words made the room feel smaller. "You mean the curse?" Catherine nodded. Abigail Montgomery, our ancestor, made a pact in 1723. Power and prosperity for her descendants, in exchange for allowing the entity to enter this world through her bloodline. The entity chose twins as its door. And so, every third generation, it comes again. I swallowed hard. "And the twins, they're the same? Across generations?" She pulled out a wooden box and spread photographs across the table. Twins from different centuries, different clothes, different backdrops. But their faces, God, their faces. They were identical. The same boy. The same girl. Over and over again. "They're not children reborn," Catherine said quietly. "They're the same entity, slipping into new flesh, wearing innocence like a mask." I stared at the photographs, my stomach twisting. "Then what did grandmother do?" "She was the strongest of us," Catherine replied. "But she couldn't kill them. She bound them, contained the entity in that room with the ritual she found in the old grimoire." Her eyes met mine, sharp and steady. But bindings don't last forever. And with Elizabeth gone, the seal is breaking. At the end of a winding dirt road in Vermont, there stood a house that looked as though time itself had forgotten it. 3 stories tall, with weathered clapboard siding and a steep gabled roof, it seemed to rise out of the earth like a relic of another century. The forest pressed in from all sides, ancient maple trees whose branches wove together so tightly they blotted out the sky, casting the house in a perpetual twilight. As a child, I thought it was magical. Summers there felt endless, filled with secret gardens, hidden passageways, and the scent of lavender drifting from my grandmother's hands as she tended her plants with almost ritualistic devotion. But the house had another side, too. A side you could feel in its silence. The way the floorboards sighed beneath your feet, or how portraits in the hallway seemed to follow you with eyes that knew too much. And then there was the locked room. Tucked at the far end of the third-floor hallway, its heavy oak door loomed like a guardian. Every time I asked my grandmother about it, her expression hardened. She would lower her voice, as though even speaking of it might wake something best left sleeping. "We don't speak of that," she'd whisper. "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Her refusal only stoked my curiosity. I would linger in the hallway during storms, pressing my ear to the wood, certain I could hear faint, childlike laughter on the other side. Once I even tried peeking through the keyhole, only to find it sealed with some dark, resinous substance, as though someone had deliberately plugged it, determined that no I should glimpse what lay beyond. When I asked my mother about it, she didn't soften like grandmother. Instead, her voice sharpened. "We don't speak of the twins." Then she changed the subject so abruptly it felt like I had crossed an invisible boundary. That was the first and last time anyone in my family ever uttered that word, twins. It stuck in my mind like a burr, lodged deep where I couldn't quite shake it loose.
Who were they?
What had happened to them? And why did the very mention of them cast a shadow across my mother's face? Years blurred. Childhood summers gave way to adulthood, the house slipping into the background of memory. But even as the world carried me forward, the image of that locked door lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just a room, it was a question. One that had haunted generations. And when the matriarch finally passed away, leaving the house in my name, the question no longer waited patiently in the dark. It demanded an answer. Because some doors, no matter how tightly sealed, are destined to be opened. The footsteps echoed in the attic stairwell, soft but deliberate, like the approach of children playing a game they had already won. Catherine clutched her bleeding hand to her chest, her face pale with terror. The circle's glow flickered, fading. "They erased the words," she whispered. "Without the final incantation, the binding won't hold." The laughter came next, two voices, boy and girl, overlapping perfectly. It slithered around the rafters, settling deep into my bones. "We've waited so long," they said in unison. Blood calls to blood. My grandmother's music box flashed in my mind, the one I'd found in the nursery, its lullaby forever slightly off-key. I bolted from the binding room, racing down the attic steps as the air behind me cracked with whispers. In the nursery, the music box sat waiting on the dresser. My hands shook as I opened it. The song tinkled to life, eerie and fragile. Inside lay a slip of paper, folded tight. I opened it with trembling fingers. My grandmother's handwriting stared back at me. To end what began, return them to where they first came. The mausoleum. Abigail Montgomery's tomb. I didn't think, I ran. Out of the house, across the overgrown lawn, toward the family cemetery. The mausoleum loomed against the dark sky, its marble walls streaked with age. The brass key turned easily in its lock, as if it had been waiting all this time. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Rows of stone sarcophagi lined the walls. At the far end, a plain altar waited. My hand brushed its surface, and I felt it, a hollow depression, a space designed to receive something. Behind me, the laughter returned. The twins stood in the doorway now, shadows coalescing into form, a boy and girl of 8, identical in every feature except for their hair. Their eyes were bottomless, ancient. "You cannot end us," they hissed. The pact was sealed. A soul from every generation. Payment for what was promised. I clutched the paper, heart pounding. "Then I renounce it," I said, my voice breaking but loud enough to fill the tomb. I, Eliza Montgomery, descendant of Abigail, return what was taken. I end what was begun. The altar flared with light. The twins screamed, their voices splitting the air like shattering glass. Their forms dissolved, shrinking into shadow, until nothing remained but a bitter silence. And then she appeared, a woman in colonial dress, her features hauntingly familiar. "Abigail Montgomery. You've done what I could not," she said softly. "The pact is broken. The debt is paid." "What's the price?" I whispered. Her eyes held mine. "Prosperity. The fortune, the influence, the luck our family has carried. It is gone. From now on, the Montgomerys will be ordinary." I thought of my grandmother, of my mother's haunted eyes, of centuries of death tied to that curse. And I nodded. "It's worth it." Abigail smiled, fading like mist. Stronger than I ever was. When I returned to the house, Catherine was waiting. Her face told me she already knew. We packed what we could, burning the journals and records in the fireplace until the ashes consumed centuries of darkness. At dawn, as we drove away, I looked back once. The house shimmered, then vanished, erased, as though it had never been. The curse was over, the cycle broken, and for the first time, silence felt like peace.